You can whisper.
Good. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council. My name is Solon Bachholz, 9017 Hudson Bay Street. I'm a director of the Fort Langley Community Association, and I'm excited to present our second annual Vision Fort Langley survey. Each year, our communities are experiencing increased growth, and the importance of community associations and engagement becomes more relevant. The FLCA's mandate is to represent the needs of all community members alike, residents and businesses. Following up on last year's survey, we came up with a survey we felt would be consistent, comprehensive, engaging, and allow the community as a whole to express their opinions regarding the state of Fort Langley now and its hopes and concerns for the future. This survey also helps the FLCA and any other interest group, including the TOL, help prioritize its goals for the coming year. This presentation is the summary of our 2017 community survey. This year, the Fort Langley Community Association partnered with the Fort Langley Legacy Foundation Group for funding, along with private donors. In future, we look forward to funding from the Township of Langley supporting the ongoing work of community groups like the FLCA run by community volunteers. Next slide. In summer 2017, the FLCA mailed surveys to every household in Fort Langley, including Bedford Landing and the Kwantlen First Nation and surrounding acreages. FLCA members are also hand-delivered surveys to every one of the approximately 1,500 households and businesses in Fort Langley that provided access. The community was also able to fill out surveys online. In total, 359 surveys were filled out. This was a 30% increase over last year's 277 responses. This makes our survey statistically relevant and shows an increase of engagement from our community, validating the interest and need for this ongoing work. Again, we ensured an unbiased review of the data and comments by hiring an independent consultant, Modus, who has historically worked closely with the township in past engagements. We will now share with you the results of the Vision Fort Langley survey with the help of a visual breakdown, which was broken into two main sections. Multiple choice answers focusing on demographics, interests, concerns, and areas of usage of the community. Written answers to give all community members the ability to express their opinions in full and allow for analysis of the general community feelings on the survey subjects. I now turn this over to George to discuss the results of that survey.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is George Audie, 8935 Glover Road. I will now show you the responses to the multiple choice section of the survey. You'll see in question 1, 311 were residents, 44 were business owners who are also residents, and 4 were business owners not residing in the fort. On the next slide, we asked residents how long they resided in Fort Langley. 32% of the respondents are 21-plus year residents, and almost as many were 5-year or less residents. As this graph shows, the value of this survey is that it encompasses all demographics within Fort Langley as a community. With 83%, we see in this next chart that there is a high level of respondents who walk and cycle to the commercial core on a regular basis. With 78%, we see in this next chart that a high level of respondents also drive to the commercial core on a regular basis. We then asked the question, how often do you access the following Fort Langley services or activities? 67% visit eating establishments, coffee and tea shops weekly or more, with a further 26 who go at least monthly. 66% visit other Fort Langley businesses weekly or more, and a further 26% monthly as well. What these 4 previous questions show is that the community members shop in the commercial core and do so often. For walking trails, we found that 62% make use of the Fort Langley walking trails weekly or more. We also found that 25% of respondents use cycling routes on a weekly or more basis, and a further 21% do so monthly. We also asked about a few other community areas. We asked about the Fort Langley National Historic Site, the Centennial or Farm Museum, and CN Station. All had significant numbers visiting once per year, with the library being visited more often on a monthly basis. On this slide, we asked, which of the following community cultural activities are attended or plan to attend this year? This section was designed to give us a baseline year over year to help us identify goals for the FLCA, as well as sharing this with township and community to help plan events in Fort Langley. The most widely attended event is the Cranberry Festival, as usual, followed by the Remembrance Day services, Farmers Market, and then the May Day Parade. In the 2016 survey, the additional events on this chart were identified as being of interest. We asked for the level of interest in each in this year's survey. The largest response, with 284, was more music events and concerts, followed by theater productions and First Nations events. We included this next questions about the effects of the film industry due to comments we received on last year's community survey as well as subsequent Fort Langley Community Association meetings. While we certainly cannot understate the negative impact that some of our community have reported, the clearly larger number is that of a positive impact from 44% of the respondents. 34% responded with no impact and 22 said it was negative. Also in our 2016 survey, more than 50% of respondents identified the lack of parking in the commercial core as a significant problem. Under current Township of Langley bylaws, new developments in Fort Langley are only required to provide half as many parking spaces as other developments in the rest of the township. So we decided to look into this with this survey. We asked, do you think the Township Council should require new developments in Fort Langley to provide the same number of parking spaces as developments in other parts of the township? The answer was a resounding yes, with 72% of respondents wanting the parking bylaws changed. With the township starting work building sidewalks on 96th Avenue, starting work on the pedestrian control crosswalk across 96th Avenue at Edel, thank you for that, and are planning to upgrade the intersection at Glover and Mavis, we asked the respondents about two more hot issues: a controlled intersection at Glover Road and 96th, and rerouting the commercial truck traffic out of Fort Langley. As you can see, people do see both as important issues. The majority voted 5, particularly on rerouting the commercial truck traffic out of the fort. In the 2016 FLCA survey, 95% of respondents identified the heritage character of Fort Langley to be very important. So we asked, are you happy with the recent and upcoming commercial developments in Fort Langley? The majority of people were unhappy with the density of development. However, the majority did like the design and character of the buildings. We did find also that the majority were unhappy with the height and lot coverage of recent, upcoming, or proposed commercial developments. I'll turn this back to Solon for the final.
While the multiple choice section gives us great statistical data, the written responses to this final section of the Vision Fort Langley survey clearly brings in the general sentiment and priorities of the community in great detail. Over 180 thought-out comments strictly from the surveyed residents and business owners were written and submitted and analyzed by the third-party Modus. We have broken down the comments into 3 important sections focused on transportation, development and character, public spaces, and community events. These comments are directly summarized by Modus with no edits. Provide more parking near the commercial core in the fort. Parking is especially lacking when there are visitors and film crews in the area. There are concerns that residential parking spots are being used by visitors and that there is a lack of enforcement on parking violations. This was the most brought up issue in the written submissions and clearly has people very frustrated. Need safer intersections for cars and pedestrians, especially at Glover and Mavis, Glover and 96, and Glover and Billy Brown. Suggest more traffic lights, 3 and 4-way stops, and clearer pedestrian crossings. Reduce traffic speed, especially on Glover and Billy Brown Road. Regarding development and character. Buildings should retain the community's unique heritage character in terms of size, height, and facades. There are concerns that heritage buildings are being torn down and some new developments do not fit the heritage character of the area. New development and businesses are too upscale and cater more to visitors than locals, which detracts from our small town character. Regarding public spaces and community events, improve and provide more outdoor public spaces, green spaces, and weatherproof seating. Upgrade civic buildings to be more conducive to community use, host more community events and festivals, and integrate more arts and culture, especially emphasis in education on the First Nations history and culture. Here is the next feedback that came out of the comment section of the survey with, is there anything else you'd like to see on the survey for next year? Transportation, greater focus on impacts and solution for parking issues, reduce vehicle and pedestrian conflict at intersections, and upgrade sidewalks. Improve and upgrade civic buildings, and more events and activities for the community. The results of the survey with 359 respondents speak loud and clear and to communicate the community's needs, sentiment, and focus moving forward as the great community that is Fort Langley. A vision for Fort Langley must be an inclusive vision. A vision is created and made up of all members of the community. Communities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they are created by everybody. I again would like to thank Council and Mayor for allowing us to share with you the opinions of the community members of Fort Langley as gathered through the Vision Fort Langley survey. The survey we have prepared is long and complex and requires additional time with those interested to review adequately. We would encourage the opportunity to discuss the survey results further with Mayor and Council and any township committee, including the Heritage Advisory Committee. We recommend and strongly encourage the township moving forward to consider these results when making decisions for the future of Fort Langley and other communities throughout the township. We look forward to working with the township and hope moving forward this community association and others with similar mandates continue to foster support as a value to the township as a whole. This can include feedback from the township regarding things they'd like to hear from the residents in the future, including tree bylaws, animal bylaws, or further questions pertaining to areas of importance to the community. Furthermore, we encourage these results to be shared to help prioritize the needs of Fort Langley as a walkable, vibrant, historic, and quaint village that is Fort Langley. Fort Langley cannot be replaced, and to move forward, it must encompass the needs of all the residents and business owners through inclusiveness while honoring its heritage that makes it so desirable. We will be updating the survey annually to be current in the community's needs and offer our survey as a nonpartisan method of engagement as well as a voice for Fort Langley and other communities throughout the township as a method to continue the dialogue of community building. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got several councillors with questions, and thank you for that. It's nice to see that some of the things that we're working on are in your survey
Accomplished.
that were accomplished. Some were ongoing, and there's still lots for the future. It's certainly a never-ending in building a community, and thank you for all that work.
Thank you.
So I've got pretty much most of council wants to ask you something.
Oh.
Councillor Richter.
Yes, thank you very much. Now, was Glen Valley included in your survey this year?
It was. So
It was.
We do hit all of the surrounding acreages, so that includes up in Forest Knolls and the areas in Glen Valley. Specifically to what length in terms of street? What's the furthest we go? 272nd.
And the results that you've got, very, very interesting. Will you be giving a copy to the clerk so that we can see the results?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And the funding for this survey, I mean, I think this is extremely useful information to council, for council to have. How did you fund it this year?
Well, the fact that we grew by 30% this year, I think just fosters the overwhelming support from both the community, but I also think it speaks loud and clear for the results that happened last year. And last year, there was much anticipation and hopes for sidewalks along 96, and as you're well aware, the township supported that initiative, and I think that's wonderful, and working together with the township to accomplishing goals that are actually recognized by the community is needed.
Yeah, and I guess there's been some requests to get funding so that you can carry on this particular initiative.
We had the pleasure of presenting with several community groups last week, and it sounds like the feedback was positive, and we look forward to hearing from the township.
So if you were to get a Township of Langley grant, which is the $2,500, would
Correct.
you be able to use it? Would that cover the cost of this survey on an ongoing basis?
Absolutely. I don't have the financials in front of me, but I do believe that this survey cost us $1,600.
$1,600, very good. Now, in the answer...
$1,400, I was corrected, sorry.
$1,400, okay. In the answers that had come out that I guess Modus had cross-tabulated, was there any cross-referencing in the findings between, because you had said at the beginning, high percentage of people there longer than 21 years, high percentage of people from 1 to 5 years. Was there any cross-tabulation in the results between those two categories?
If I understand you correctly, do you mean is there any tabulation between the different types of residents reflective to the types of comments they made? Is that correct? I didn't personally analyze that. I think that's something that we could have Modus do, but due to our limited funding, we also had to be cautious in how much money we spent with Modus, even with their community support program. Is there anything we can speak to that? Yeah, I think that's about as clear as I could say. We would have the ability with additional funding to definitely break down the surveys and determine whether sentiment in the comments directly correlated to the residents.
Yeah, and I guess that's where I'm going. Are the new residents finding more gaps than the older residents are?
My personal sentiment is that you definitely find some consistency between the newer residents and the older, but in terms of actual statistical data that would be relevant, that would be something that we'd have to use a third-party company to analyze. Yeah.
Okay, and my last question is, I found the results on parking being a problem. Probably not surprising, but 72% wanting more parking. Now, do they understand the impact of providing more parking on walkability? I mean, there is a trade-off there. If you're going to build parking lots, you're going to lose walkability.
Well, one thing I would like to say regarding the survey, I mean, the survey speaks for the residents and businesses alike, you know, and those are feelings and their sentiments and their goals. And that doesn't mean that we take a stance and say, well, do you know that this request comes with this? And that's part of the township and council's job in having public hearings and trying to accomplish goals as well. It's finding a balance of what the community really needs and what's viable. And, you know, in speaking about parking, you know, it's clear that this has been an ongoing concern in Fort Langley, and we recognize that as well. As a small community group, you know, we talk about identifying our goals through surveys. We recognize that this is something maybe that we can tackle on a small scale, while the township can tackle maybe on a more meaningful, larger scale. And so for us, you know, we recognize that perhaps one of our goals this year will be educating residents and visitors of Fort Langley where the existing parking is and helping navigate traffic better. You know, that's something on a small scale that can improve perhaps parking. But that doesn't address the core problem, and I think, you know, we've identified that with perhaps some concerns about outdated bylaws in parking that perhaps could be addressed, that although don't mean building more parking lots, but rather just moving forward help address future developments and parking needs associated too.
Okay, and was there any sense of how much more parking is needed? Like 100 stalls, 50 stalls?
In terms of what's actually needed versus what's actually there, I think it would be important to know what's there. And I do remember a member of the FLCA actually going around Fort Langley and doing a count of every parking stall in the core. And if I'm correct in that count, it's 105. Yeah. Exactly.
5.
And if you think about Cranberry Days and Festival Days, and as a resident of Fort Langley, and you think about all the wonderful visitors we have, you know, that take advantage of the township's functions in Fort Langley, could you imagine 105 parking stalls supporting it? And I think that's a number that, you know, really resounds to me, more so than how many more do we need. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Qualley?
Thanks for the survey. It's interesting information for sure. Can you go back to your slide on filming? That one just went by really quickly, and I
For sure.
sort of missed the statistics on that.
Off the top of my head, it's almost an even split, but let's pull it back up.
Yeah, it was split at 12.
12?
We'll get you there just one second.
Sorry, thanks.
Number, guys? 12 in the auto break
Maybe while you're looking for that, I'll ask another question.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think, you know, the parking perspective is really interesting. And obviously 105 stalls don't support the Cranberry Festival. That's why they have to bus people in. And we've all been there and understand what that looks like. I would be really curious in your next survey if there was an opportunity to talk about people's appetite for paid parking and in more enforcement around time-limited parking, because that's sort of one of the potential iterations of additional parking, right, is looking at how to pay for that parking.
I think that would be a wonderful addition. And again, the fact that these questions, you know, revolve around solutions, I think part of actually speaking to the community and providing some options will help guide what the best solution is from a community standpoint.
Yeah, I think that, you know, paid parking and time-limited enforcement, there is time-limited parking, it's just the enforcement of that. Yeah.
And
so,
enforcement was a word that did seem to come up.
Yeah.
consistently.
I mean, anybody who's circled trying to find parking is, you know.
Is aware.
Yeah, has that same sentiment.
We're on that slide for you.
Talking about sort of the next steps for Fort Langley, I'm positive that you're aware of it, but Thursday night is the open house for the First Nation plans around their lodge ideas in the museum redevelopment. So I just wanted to make sure that that information had gotten to you guys and you were aware that that was happening, and hopefully you're encouraging all your
It's actually
members.
being promoted on our page right now.
Oh, great. So good. Hopefully
We try
that'll-
to engage the whole community with any event coming up that impacts Fort Langley.
Good. So the filming slide, this is the one that I was
Yep.
interested in looking at. So yeah, I would be interested to know what that means from the merchant's perspective versus the resident's perspective, because you do have people there who are live work, right?
Yeah.
So what that industry looks like from their perspective?
Yeah, and I'll speak just briefly to this question. Again, this wasn't actually on our first annual survey. And again, this is why the Fort Langley Community Association and all community associations are an open channel of dialogue for community members on both sides of the fence. And we had a presentation from an owner who lived in a residence and was being impacted by the film and asked us, do you get feedback? And so we brought that question in, and that was an opportunity for businesses to share their impact as well. I think speaking to Councillor Richter's question as well in terms of delineating who has the positive versus the negative, we could do that, but it would require some extra work.
Right.
We'd have to go back through each handwritten survey and figure out whether you're a business owner or a resident and then what the answer to that question, but it would be doable.
Have you had a chance yet to share the survey with the BIA and get their feedback around it?
Have we actually shared? We have not. This is actually the first official presentation of the survey to public.
And what was the survey period? Sorry if you said I missed it.
We did the survey in summer. I believe it was in June. Is that correct? Yeah, in June. Yeah. And actually, for consistency, it was the same time we did it last year. And moving forward, in order to be consistent, we will intend on doing it at the same time each year.
So it was the month of June 2017.
Correct, yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
before plywood became a dominant facade for Langley. Okay, thanks.
As I'm sure you're well aware with these volunteer groups, we all put in our time for free, and it takes time to compile a study, actually hand deliver it, collect that data, and have it analyzed and prepare a well-planned presentation to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Arneson?
Yes, thank you. Some of my questions have already been answered, but I just want to say thank you very much for coming and giving us the updated survey. I do think it's rather timely, as been mentioned, that this is coming around the same time and some of the proposals that we're considering for Fort Langley are being addressed, and it's a really good opportunity for engagement. And I did notice that you put in quite a few top-of-mind things that I would say that are really relevant. So just to refer to the parking aspect, because I know that that's been discussed for some time. I would like to follow up on some of the comments to say that I think a parking study would be something that would probably be a good idea if that were to progress to sort of a policy initiative, a resolution of council, because you know, there's many things that I think that could be done to address that. Certainly there's lots of new technologies and innovation. I'm thinking about a parking app, so that people that could come there might know what might be available. You know, we have ride sharing, electric car and vehicle charging stations actually are a really good way to encourage people to come and stay, but for a limited time, as opposed to just a straight out paying for the parking. So that may be also an option. I was also interested in the heritage aspects and the kind of feedback that the community was given about the density and the guidelines and the small town feel and things that are somewhat subjective in a way, but are tried to be captured by the heritage guidelines. I also think it's a good idea, actually, and I think maybe you or one of the other delegates, George, said this. Making a presentation, I think, would be a good idea to the Heritage Advisory Committee to talk about the survey and give them the feedback about what it is. Because I think it's really quite significant that I think it was 359 individuals had completed that survey.
That's correct.
So I think that also would be a really good idea, and just, yeah, strong encouragement to get the community out there for our informational meeting on this week.
I really appreciate the feedback. And again, you know, 359 is only relevant when you factor how small Fort Langley truly is. And when we talk about 1,500 homes, 359 responses is very statistically relevant.
Yeah.
Regarding your parking, I think this dialogue is exactly what's important. I think we can all agree that many of these problems are not one-year solutions or one-year problems. They're ongoing things. And when I see something positive, for example, where sidewalks was an issue last year and then, you know, was addressed in a very positive way with council and mayor in actually resulting that, you notice that that's no longer the main objective of the survey or even the feedback. So you've accomplished something that's very positive. And in presenting this year's survey, as you mentioned, regarding the heritage aspect and the parking aspect, these are things that have been top of mind for some time. And I think this is what's going to facilitate actual solutions rather than more talk. So I would welcome any opportunity, and I think, you know, I can speak for the FLCA that if there's additional questions that you want brought in that would help bring solutions forward or help validate solutions that you propose, I think that's a wonderful opportunity. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Fox?
Thank you. Could you go to the slide? And
What's it about? And I'll try to guess.
It had two graphs, and one was the truck route slide. I can't remember the number.
Slide 19, 3 forward. This
Right
one here?
there.
Yep.
Perfect. Because we haven't, we had council had come up with a plan. I mean, since I've been on this council, I think the number of surveys has been fairly ongoing, and we've always heard about the truck route. And council came up with a plan to work towards eliminating the truck route. And we haven't heard much feedback, to be honest with you, from the Fort Langley community as a whole. Do you like the idea? Don't you like the idea? So this is really the first kind of contextual response to that. So the 5, just to go over that then, what's the 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? That's the 5th, the 5 would be the most important thing. They want to see us continue with our plans in that regard. Had the plans been before the survey came out? I think they were, if I'm not mistaken.
There was early discussion that this is what was going to happen, but at that point in time, the survey was already finalized, and that still doesn't detract from the representations that's in here. So for example, you just mentioned this is the first sort of feedback you've heard from the community. Well, if this question wasn't on that survey, you wouldn't have any. So I still think it's valid, and I think the plan that you guys have put forward is a positive step.
Yeah, because we haven't really heard anything, and I think it's critically important that we know. I mean, obviously it's important, but what's the feedback? I mean, are people excited about it, getting it out of there, and the plan to remove it? And we hadn't heard much.
And again, if that's something that you would, and don't get me wrong, I think us as the FLCA, hear a lot on the ground because we're in Fort Langley, and perhaps people find us an easy conduit to speak to. I've heard it loud and clear in the community, but perhaps that hasn't been relayed to council and mayor. But again, if you'd like to add questions to next year's that you think are relevant regarding the steps that the mayor and council have made for rerouting the traffic, I think that's a wonderful step, and we'd be happy to accommodate that.
Okay, thank you.
You and Councillor Long.
Yeah, I was hoping to get up first because I might have just said, I don't know if we want to dissect the entire thing tonight because it's a very complicated document that you presented, and I appreciate it, and you gave us a quick overview with the slides. So just wanted to confirm you've given the full copy to the clerk so we can sort of examine things a little bit more closely. But, the popular topic is parking, and as you know, that's not unique to Fort Langley. It's an issue all over. But I would be very surprised if a survey result said that paid parking was something that everybody wanted. But anyhow, we'll see. But I just wanted to thank you for the presentation and just be sure that we're going to get a detailed copy that we can have a look at and get back to you on.
Thank you, Councillor Long. And you're right. I mean, some of the solutions may not be loved by all. But again, when you make decisions for the community, you make the best decisions you can. You're not expected to please everyone, but at least bringing solutions forward is a step in the right direction. Regarding the presentation, all of the statistical data is being provided to Township. The comment section, we'd be happy to sit down and go over it. It's a long, detailed document. Yeah.
Well, we look forward to seeing you all on February the 8th.
You got it.
That'll be an exciting night.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Council.
Actually, I should mention, it's not just at night, it's the whole day, right? It starts.
Yeah,
so there's plenty of time for people to pop in.
Yeah, Councillor Whitmarsh, then Councillor Richter.
Thank you for coming today. Just a couple of questions. Maybe my first one, since this slide is up here. To get these, I forget as you went through your presentation, are these two that were identified as the most important items that came up on the survey that are most critical items, or how did these two come up here? Are they identified as the most important items? Were they part of a list of multiple choice that people would just check a box and say, these ones are important to me, or how did we get these?
So in this particular case, if my memory corrects me, serves me correct, in this case they had a selection between 1 and 5, and they checked the box, and then there was multiple questions pertaining 1 to 5 responses. And so you'll see here number 5 being most important, 1 least important, and you can see the scale accordingly. So they had the choice of 1 to 5 for this question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I'm wondering, like, we have 2 items here, controlled intersection at Glover Road, the rerouting commercial traffic. Were these items that people wrote in and identified that were important to them, or were these part of a list that the survey provided for them and then they checked off?
It mirrors the 2016 survey, so we duplicated our questions, and these were the 2 questions on there. Yeah.
Okay.
For consistency. I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question 100% correctly.
Well, I guess I'm trying to get at how it was a multiple choice.
Correct,
There's a list of items that the FLCA came up with. Here's 9 or 10 things that we think are critical issues. And would you rank them in order of how
I
you
understand
think
your
they're
question
important?
now. So the survey itself was not all of the same format, and your question pertains to the format specifically.
Yes, it
So
does.
some questions they're all essentially multiple choice except for the comment section, but the format of the multiple choice is different because some questions don't have 1 to 5 most important. For example, how long have you been a resident of Fort Langley?
Fair
You
enough.
have 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15. In this particular case, or this segment of questions, was more about feeling of what's important versus least important. So in this case, this question pertained to this format.
Right, okay, so this is the second year of the survey, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
So one of the things as you go forward and you do this in each year, one of the things that would be helpful is to sort of discuss the change from one year to the next as to how these issues change. So, if 40% think this is the most important item, but the next year only 30% do, that might demonstrate some progression as we move forward. That would be very helpful.
So I actually really appreciate that question because it's exactly in line with our objectives. We feel that 3 years is the beginning of a baseline, which is essentially what you're speaking to. So next year's results will actually present a baseline showing the history over 3 years and watching that sentiment through the community change. And that is absolutely our goal for, again, being consistent in who analyzes our data, being consistent in our questioning, but also being consistent in when we take the survey, and that way the baseline is about as true as it can be. Yeah.
Right, okay. And just my final comment I'd make around parking, and obviously that's a challenging topic. What do you do with parking? We would have examples of many other communities where they have lots of parking, and that's because nobody goes there.
Yeah.
So, sometimes having a busy place and a place where it's hard to find parking is actually a sign of success and good things. It would be difficult to have enough parking to manage the Cranberry Festival, for example, which is such a significantly large event, very successful event. If you had enough parking to handle that event, you can imagine how much empty space you'd have the rest of the year just sitting there. So somewhere I realize parking is an issue, and I've had lots of trouble parking there too. But, there's a balance. Sometimes having no parking is actually a sign of really good things and creates a great environment.
No, absolutely. And again, being nonpartisan in this is that you can appeal to everyone. I'm not saying that there's one solution that solves all problems, but recognizing that this is a concern in the community and being open to finding solutions that do the best they can to support all aspects of the community, that's the goal.
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you very much.
Councillor Richter and then Councillor Qualley.
Yeah, and I just wanted to I thank you so much for this input, and I'm glad to see that Fort Langley wanting to get commercial traffic out is going to be good for Fort Langley, but I did want to run a caution about unintended consequences, because Fort Langley's desire to see this happen has been interpreted by Walnut Grove as taking your problem from Fort Langley and putting it into Walnut Grove. So I would hope in the future that consequences of recommendations to council might take into consideration the other communities as well.
And I think that's a wonderful thought, and I think we're all cognizant that, every decision we make has a reaction, and I think that speaks volumes, again, to our presentation last week with other community members, is that we're not just putting up our blinders and saying all we represent is Fort Langley, albeit the mandate of the FLCA is to represent the residents and businesses of Fort Langley alike. I think these community associations have made a tremendous effort getting together and sharing each of their concerns in the community and working together towards solutions that also support each other's mandates. So I actually think that we're connecting more than segregating.
Councillor Qualley.
You're welcome.
Sorry, one last question. I did, and if it's an oversight, I'll apologize, but there was no question in here about public safety. And we hear a lot through residents and through social media about theft in different parts of our community. And so was there something in there and I missed it, or?
Well, public safety is not just in the matter of crime. I think even crossing the street on 96 can be considered public safety, so I wouldn't say there was no questions. But to your question specifically, again, when we did the survey, it was in June, and it wasn't the hot topic at the time, but I have noticed in the past 3-4 months that there has been a very growing discussion around property crime in Fort Langley specifically. And I think that's very much going to lead towards a question for next year. Yeah. Yeah. We actually had somebody present at our FLCA meeting regarding public safety and moving forward to support that.
From the RCMP or?
Coming up in our February meeting, yeah.
Sorry, the RCMP
Coming up
presenting
in our
in
meeting.
February? Okay, good. Thank you for that.
Right. that covers all the speakers. Thank you very much for your presentation and for the work you've done.
Thank you again.
All right, next